My husband broke my leg for slapping his mistress. I told my father, leave no survivors. My name is Fidela, and I am 32 years old. Right now, I am lying in a hospital bed with my leg wrapped in a cast, staring out the window at a city that has no idea what just happened to me. 5 minutes ago, I made a phone call to my father. I said only 5 words, leave no survivors in that house. What my husband did to me tonight changed everything. Before we dive into this story, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you believe that no one deserves to be betrayed by the person they trusted most, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What I am about to share with you is the story of how my perfect marriage turned into my worst nightmare, and how my father made sure my husband lost everything. I grew up in Austin, Texas, in a house that sat on 3 acres of land at the end of a quiet road lined with oak trees. From the outside, we looked like any other wealthy family in the area. My father, Raymond Castellano, owned the largest construction company in South Texas. He built shopping centers, office buildings, and luxury homes for people who had more money than they knew what to do with. But anyone who spent enough time in business circles knew that my father was not just a successful contractor. He had connections that went beyond blueprints and building permits. Powerful people owed him favors. Dangerous people respected him, and everyone understood one simple rule. You do not cross Raymond Castellano. My mother, Dolores, was the opposite of my father in every way. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and believed that kindness could solve any problem. She taught me how to paint watercolors on Sunday afternoons and how to find beauty in the smallest things. When I was 14 years old, cancer took her from us. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed holding her hand as she took her last breath. My father stood in the corner of the room, silent, his jaw tight, and his eyes filled with a rage that had nowhere to go. He could not fight cancer. He could not make deals with death. And that powerlessness broke something inside him. After my mother passed away, my father poured all of his love into me. He was strict sometimes, overbearing, but I never doubted for a second that he would do anything to protect me. He used to say that family is the only thing that matters in this world. Blood is thicker than water, thicker than contracts, thicker than any business deal, and he made me promise that if anyone ever hurt me, I would tell him. He would handle it. At the time, I did not fully understand what he meant by handle it. I was about to find out. I met Derek Whitmore at a charity gala 8 years ago. I was 24, fresh out of art school, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. My father had dragged me to the event because he wanted me to network with potential buyers for my paintings. I was standing alone by the bar, nursing a glass of champagne I did not even want when Derek approached me. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark brown hair that he kept neatly combed back and green eyes that seemed to catch the light from every chandelier in the room. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and when he smiled at me, I felt my heart skip a beat. He introduced himself as a corporate lawyer at one of the most prestigious firms in Houston. He told me he had noticed me from across the room and could not resist coming over to say hello. We talked for 3 hours that night. He asked me about my art, my dreams, my favorite places to visit. He listened like every word I said was the most important thing he had ever heard. When the gala ended, he asked for my phone number. I gave it to him without hesitation. My father did not like Derek from the start. The first time I brought Derek home for dinner, my father barely spoke 2 words to him. Afterward, when Derek had left, my father sat me down in his study and said something I should have paid more attention to. He told me that Derek was too smooth, too polished, too perfect. He said that men who have no visible flaws are usually hiding them very well. I dismissed his concerns as overprotective fatherly instincts. I told him that Derek was different. Derek loved me. My father just shook his head and said he hoped I was right. Derek and I dated for 2 years before he proposed. He got down on one knee at the same charity gala where we had first met in front of 300 guests with a 5-carat diamond ring that sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. I said yes through tears of joy. My father attended the engagement party, but he did not smile once. Our wedding was held at a vineyard in Napa Valley. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception was elegant, and I danced with Derek under a canopy of fairy lights, believing that I had found my happily ever after. We bought a 4-bedroom house in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Houston. I got a job managing an art gallery downtown. Derek made partner at his law firm. From the outside, we had everything. For the first 4 years of our marriage, I truly believed I was living a dream. Derek was attentive, romantic, and supportive of my career. We took trips to Paris, Barcelona, and the Amalfi Coast. He brought me flowers every Friday. We had date nights where we would try new restaurants and laugh until our stomachs hurt. When friends asked me how I had gotten so lucky, I honestly did not know what to say. I just knew that I had found my person. We never had children. Derek always said the timing was not right. He wanted to make partner first, then build our savings, then maybe consider starting a family. I agreed because I trusted his judgment. I thought we had all the time in the world. I did not realize that while I was planning our future, he was already planning his escape. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I chose to ignore. About 2 years ago, Derek started coming home later and later. He said there were important cases that required his attention, clients who needed hand-holding meetings that ran over schedule. I believed him because I had no reason not to. He was a successful lawyer. Of course he was busy. His phone became an extension of his body. He carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. He changed his password every few weeks and always kept the screen facing down on every surface. One night, I glanced at his phone when a message came through and saw a heart emoji next to a name I did not recognize. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said it was just a female colleague who sent emojis to everyone. She was overly friendly, he explained. Nothing to worry about. I apologized for being suspicious. I felt guilty for even asking. There were other things, too. Receipts for dinners I did not attend. A faint smell of perfume on his shirts that was not mine. A weekend business trip to Chicago that he came back from looking more relaxed than stressed. Each time I found a way to explain it away. I told myself I was being paranoid, insecure, ridiculous. I told myself that Derek loved me and would never do anything to hurt me. I was so desperate to believe in our perfect life that I refused to see what was right in front of my face. I wish I had listened to my father. I wish I had trusted my instincts, but I did not. And by the time I finally opened my eyes, the damage was already done. 6 months before everything fell apart, the distance between Derek and me became impossible to ignore. He used to reach for my hand when we walked together. Now he walked 3 steps ahead like I was a stranger following him. He used to kiss me goodbye every morning. Now he barely looked up from his phone as I headed out the door. Our Friday date nights disappeared entirely. Every week there was a new excuse, a client dinner, a case that was going to trial, a networking event he absolutely had to attend. I tried to fix things. One evening, I spent 4 hours preparing his favorite meal, filet mignon with roasted vegetables and a bottle of the red wine we had drunk on our honeymoon. I set the table with candles and put on the dress he had always loved, a deep burgundy silk that hugged my curves in all the right places. I texted him to let him know dinner would be ready at 7. He said he would be there. At 7:30, the candles had burned down halfway. At 8, the food was cold. At 9, I finally heard his keys in the door. He walked in, glanced at the table, and shrugged like it was nothing. He said he had gotten caught up at the office. He was not even hungry. Then he went upstairs to take a shower while I sat alone at a table set for 2, wondering where my husband had gone. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and found the bed empty beside me. I walked to the window and saw Derek outside on the back patio, his face lit by the glow of his phone. He was smiling, typing something, then laughing softly at whatever response he received. I stood there watching for nearly 20 minutes. He never looked up. He never sensed me. He was completely absorbed in whoever was on the other end of that conversation. When he finally came back inside, I pretended to be asleep. I did not have the courage to ask who he was talking to. I was afraid of the answer. My best friend Harriet was the one who finally forced me to confront reality. Harriet and I had been friends since our freshman year of college. We had survived bad roommates, worse boyfriends, and every major life event together. She worked in commercial real estate and had an extensive network of contacts throughout Houston. When she called me one Tuesday afternoon and said she needed to see me urgently, I knew something was wrong. We met at a coffee shop we had been going to for over a decade. Harriet was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup she had not touched. Her face was pale. She looked like she had not slept in days. She told me she had been at a networking event the previous week at a rooftop bar downtown. She had spotted Derek across the room and was about to go say hello when she noticed he was not alone. He was with a woman Harriet had never seen before. She described her to me in detail. Tall, maybe 5'9", with long red hair that fell past her shoulders. She was wearing a black dress that was cut low in the front and even lower in the back. She was young, probably late 20s, with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly how beautiful you are. Harriet watched them for nearly an hour. She saw Derek hold this woman's hand across the table. She saw him lean in and whisper something that made the woman throw her head back and laugh. She saw him kiss her on the forehead before they left together. Not a friendly peck. A tender, intimate kiss that you would give someone you loved. I did not want to believe her. I told her she must have been mistaken. Maybe it was a client. Maybe it was a cousin I had never met. Maybe the lighting was bad and she thought she saw something that was not there. Harriet just looked at me with sad eyes and said she wished that were true, but she knew what she saw, and she loved me too much to let me live a lie. After I left the coffee shop, I went home and started looking for answers. I began with the credit card statements from our joint account. Derek handled most of our finances, so I rarely looked at the details. When I finally sat down and went through 3 months of transactions, my stomach turned. There were charges at restaurants I had never been to. Not just casual lunches, but expensive dinners at places that required reservations weeks in advance. There were hotel charges that made no sense. Why would Derek need a hotel room 40 minutes from our house? There were spa treatments, shopping trips, and one charge that made me feel like I had been punched in the chest. A purchase at Tiffany & Co. for $5,200. I had never received any jewelry from that store. I went upstairs to Derek's closet and started going through his things. In the inside pocket of one of his suit jackets, I found a silk handkerchief that did not belong to me. It was pale pink with delicate embroidery along the edges. When I brought it to my nose, I could smell a perfume that was definitely not mine. Something floral and expensive. Something a younger woman might wear. That night, when Derek came home, I confronted him about the handkerchief. I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. I asked him simply and directly whose it was and why it was in his pocket. He did not get defensive at first. Instead, he looked at me with an expression that was almost amused, like I was a child asking a silly question. He told me it belonged to a colleague who had ridden with him to a client meeting. She had dropped it in his car, and he had forgotten to return it. That was all. Nothing more. He actually had the audacity to ask if I was feeling okay if something was stressing me out, if I was perhaps becoming a bit too anxious about nothing. Then his tone shifted. He asked me why I was going through his things in the first place. He said that married couples should trust each other, and my behavior was starting to feel like an invasion of his privacy. By the end of the conversation, I was the one apologizing. I told him I was sorry for jumping to conclusions. I promised to work on my insecurities. He kissed me on the forehead the same way Harriet had seen him kiss that other woman and said he forgave me. I went to bed that night feeling ashamed of myself for doubting him. But deep inside, in a place I was not yet ready to acknowledge, I knew something was very wrong. A crack had formed in the foundation of my marriage, and no amount of pretending could make it disappear. 3 weeks before the night that changed everything, Derek left his phone at home when he went to the gym. It was a Saturday morning, and I was sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee when I heard it buzzing on the counter. The screen lit up with notification after notification, all from the same contact. The name showed as Crystal with a red heart emoji next to it. I knew I should not look. I knew that whatever I found would destroy me. but I also knew that I could not keep living in willful ignorance. I picked up the phone, entered the password I had secretly watched him type a week earlier, and opened the messages. What I read made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the phone. "I miss you, baby. Last night was amazing. When are you leaving her? I cannot wait for us to start our real life together." I scrolled back through the conversation history. It went on for 18 months. 18 months of messages filled with love declarations, inside jokes, and plans for a future that did not include me. Derek called this woman his soulmate. He called her the love of his life. He told her that I was just a temporary situation, a means to an end. He promised her that once he secured his position at the firm and got access to more of my father's connections, he would file for divorce and marry her instead. I kept reading, even though every word felt like a knife in my chest. I learned that Crystal was 27 years old and worked as a marketing coordinator at a company that partnered with Derek's law firm. I learned that Derek had rented her an apartment in the Galleria area, a luxury one-bedroom that cost $4,000 a month. The rent was being paid from our joint savings account. The money I thought we were saving for our future was funding his affair. There were photos, too. Pictures of them together on a beach in Cancun, taken during what Derek had told me was a business conference in Los Angeles. Pictures of her wearing the jewelry that had appeared on our credit card statement. Pictures that made it clear their relationship was far more than emotional. But the message that broke me completely was an email Derek had sent to Crystal 2 months earlier. In it, he wrote about me with such casual cruelty that I had to read it 3 times to believe it was real. He called me boring and predictable. He said I had let myself go since we got married. He wrote that the only reason he had married me in the first place was to get close to my father and his money. He said I was nothing but a stepping stone, and once he had climbed high enough, he would kick me aside and never look back. I sat on the kitchen floor for what felt like hours. I cried until I had no tears left. Then I cried some more. Every memory I had of our marriage now felt like a lie. Every "I love you" he had ever said was poisoned. Every tender moment we had shared was nothing but performance. I had given this man 8 years of my life, and he had never loved me for a single second. When I finally pulled myself together enough to stand up, I knew I had a choice to make. I could confront Derek immediately and watch him spin more lies. Or I could be smart about this. I could gather every piece of evidence I needed and make sure that when I left him, I would take everything he cared about with me. I chose the second option. I took screenshots of every message, every email, every photo. I saved them to a folder on my phone and backed them up to a cloud account Derek did not know existed. Then I put his phone back exactly where I had found it and waited for him to come home from the gym. When Derek walked through the door, sweaty and smiling like he did not have a care in the world, I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. The love I had once felt had turned to ice. I made him breakfast. I asked about his workout. I played the role of the dutiful wife while inside I was already planning my escape. That afternoon I called my father. I did not tell him the details yet. I just told him I was going through something difficult and needed time to figure out my next steps. He did not push me. He simply said that whenever I was ready to talk, he would be there. And he reminded me of what he had always promised. Anyone who hurts you will answer to me. I also contacted a divorce attorney named Marcus, a longtime friend of my father who had handled some of the most contentious divorces in Texas. I met with him in secret and showed him everything I had found. He was appalled but not surprised. He told me that men like Derek always thought they were smarter than everyone else and that arrogance would be their downfall. He advised me to continue documenting everything and to start quietly moving money into accounts Derek could not access. Over the next few weeks, I became the world's best actress. I smiled at Derek over dinner. I asked about his day. I slept beside him every night while dreaming of the moment I would watch his life fall apart. It took every ounce of self-control I had, but I knew the payoff would be worth it. I also did some research on Crystal. I learned that before Derek, she had been involved with another married man, a surgeon who had eventually gone back to his wife. I found her social media profiles and saw exactly what kind of woman she was. Every photo was calculated to attract attention. Every post was designed to make her look like a glamorous, carefree young woman living her best life. She had no idea that her best life was about to come crashing down around her. The storm was coming, and neither Derek nor Crystal saw it on the horizon. The charity gala at the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Houston was supposed to be one of the biggest social events of the year. Over 500 people had paid $1,000 a plate to attend, and the guest list read like a who's who of Houston's elite. Derek's law firm was one of the primary sponsors, which meant attendance was mandatory. He told me we needed to present a united front to show everyone that we were the perfect power couple. I agreed immediately, but not for the reasons he thought. I knew from the event planning committee's website that Crystal's company was a co-sponsor. I knew she would be there, and I wanted to see her face to face. I spent 3 hours getting ready that evening. I chose a red silk gown that I had bought specifically for this occasion. It was elegant but bold, the kind of dress that made a statement. I did my hair in loose waves and applied makeup that highlighted my cheekbones and made my eyes look larger than usual. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I did not see a victim. I saw a woman who was ready for war. Derek barely glanced at me when I came downstairs. He was too busy checking his phone, probably texting Crystal. He told me I looked nice, which was the most enthusiasm he had shown toward me in months. We drove to the hotel in silence, his hand never once reaching for mine. The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over tables draped in white linen and adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces. A string quartet played softly in the corner, while waiters in black vests circulated with trays of champagne. Derek immediately began working the room, shaking hands with partners and clients, while I trailed behind him like an afterthought. I saw her before she saw me. Crystal was standing near the bar wearing a black dress that left very little to the imagination. Her red hair was styled in perfect waves, and she was laughing at something the man beside her had said. When she noticed Derek across the room, her eyes lit up in a way that made my stomach turn. She looked at my husband like he was a prize she had already won. Derek excused himself to get us drinks, and I watched him walk directly toward Crystal. They exchanged a few words brief enough to appear innocent to anyone watching, but I saw the way her fingers brushed against his wrist. I saw the look they shared that spoke of 1,000 secrets I was never meant to know. Crystal did not approach me right away. She waited until Derek had wandered off to speak with a senior partner before making her move. She walked up to me with a champagne glass in her hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She introduced herself and said she worked with one of the firms that did business with Derek's company. She said it was so nice to finally meet me. I played along. I told her it was nice to meet her too. I asked her how she was enjoying the event. She gave all the right answers, but there was something mocking in her tone, something that suggested she knew exactly who I was and found the whole situation amusing. Then she leaned in close, like she was about to share a secret between girlfriends. She lowered her voice and said that Derek had told her we were not really happy together. She said he had mentioned that we had not been intimate in months. She said I should not worry because she had been taking very good care of him. Something inside me snapped. Before I knew what I was doing, my hand connected with her face in a slap that echoed through the ballroom. The crack of my palm against her cheek silenced every conversation within a 20-foot radius. Crystal stumbled backward, her champagne spilling down the front of her dress. She let out a shriek that sounded more theatrical than genuine, her hand flying to her reddening cheek. Everyone turned to stare. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Whispers erupted like wildfire across the room. I stood there with my hand still raised my chest, heaving, feeling a mixture of rage and liberation that I had never experienced before. Derek came running, but he did not come to me. He went straight to Crystal, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and asking if she was okay. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was some crazy woman who had attacked an innocent person for no reason. His face was twisted with an anger I had never seen directed at me before. He grabbed my elbow and hissed that I had lost my mind. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing. He said I had just humiliated him in front of everyone who mattered to his career. I looked him straight in the eyes and spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I told him I knew everything. 18 months. The apartment he was paying for. The trips they had taken together. All of it. I told him our marriage was over and that he would be hearing from my lawyer. The color drained from his face. For a moment he seemed genuinely shocked that I had discovered the truth. Then his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. He told me we were leaving immediately. He would deal with this at home. He did not wait for my response. He simply grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the exit while 500 guests watched in stunned silence. I could feel their eyes following us all the way to the door. The perfect power couple was not so perfect anymore. In the car, Derek did not speak for the first 10 minutes. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching beneath his skin. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a threat that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He said I had made a very big mistake tonight. He said I had no idea who I was dealing with. He said my father's money would not protect me from what was coming. I told him I wanted a divorce. I told him my lawyer would contact him in the morning. I told him he could have Crystal because I was done being his stepping stone. He laughed. It was not a normal laugh. It was something darker, something that sounded almost unhinged. He asked if I really thought I could just walk away from him. He said he had invested 8 years in this marriage, and he was not about to let me ruin everything he had worked for. I should have been afraid. Looking back, I realize I should have jumped out of the car at the next red light, but I was too angry to be scared. I told him he had ruined our marriage by himself the moment he crawled into bed with another woman. I told him I was not his property. I told him he could threaten me all he wanted, but I was still leaving. The rest of the drive passed in thick, suffocating silence. Neither of us spoke another word, but I could feel the rage radiating off him like heat from an engine. Something terrible was waiting for me at the end of that car ride. I just did not know it yet. We pulled into the driveway of our house shortly before midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, all the lights in the surrounding homes already dark. Derek got out of the car first and slammed his door so hard the whole vehicle shook. I followed more slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs as I walked toward the front door. Inside, the house was silent, except for the sound of our footsteps on the marble floor. Derek threw his keys on the entryway table and walked straight to the liquor cabinet in the living room. He poured himself a whiskey and drank it in one swallow. Then he poured another. I told him I was going to sleep in the guest room. I turned toward the stairs, wanting nothing more than to lock myself away until morning, when I could call my father and figure out my next steps. I did not make it to the first stair. Derek's voice stopped me cold. He said we were not finished talking. He said I did not get to embarrass him in front of 500 people and then just walk away like nothing happened. He wanted answers. He wanted to know how I had found out who had told me how long I had been spying on him. I turned to face him. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, now blocking my path. The look in his eyes was something I had never seen before. This was not the charming man who had swept me off my feet at a charity gala 8 years ago. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. I told him Harriet had seen him with Crystal at a bar. I told him I had gone through his phone and read every single message. I told him I knew about the apartment, the trips, the jewelry, all of it. I told him I knew he had only married me for access to my father's money and connections. Derek did not deny any of it. Instead, he seemed almost relieved that the charade was finally over. He admitted that he had never really loved me. He said I was useful but boring, a means to an end. He said Crystal was everything I was not. She was exciting, passionate, and did not spend her days surrounded by paintings nobody wanted to buy. He said he had been planning to divorce me eventually, but on his terms when he was ready, when he had secured enough resources to live comfortably without needing my family's support. Each word hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let him see me cry. I told him I did not care what he thought of me. I told him our marriage had been a waste of 8 years of my life, and I was grateful it was finally over. I told him he could have his mistress and his shallow, meaningless existence because I was walking away with my dignity intact. That was when everything changed. I turned my back on him and started walking up the stairs. I heard him move behind me, but I did not think anything of it. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I felt his hand grab a fistful of my hair and yank me backward with a force that sent pain shooting through my scalp. I screamed as he pulled me toward him, my feet scrambling to find purchase on the stairs. I tried to twist away to break free from his grip, but he was too strong. The next thing I knew, I was falling. He had shoved me with both hands, and I was tumbling down the stairs, my body hitting each step with sickening thuds. I heard something crack when I landed at the bottom, a sound I will never forget. The pain that exploded through my right leg was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was blinding, all-consuming, so intense that I could not even scream at first. When my voice finally came back, I wailed. The agony was indescribable. I looked down and saw my leg bent at an angle that made no biological sense. I knew immediately that it was broken badly. Derek stood at the top of the stairs looking down at me with an expression that haunts me to this day. There was no concern in his eyes, no remorse, nothing but cold, detached satisfaction. He told me this was what happened when I did not know my place. He told me I should have kept my mouth shut and played along like a good little wife. Then he simply walked away, disappearing into the bedroom and closing the door behind him. I was alone at the bottom of the stairs with a shattered leg crying and shaking in the darkness. The pain was so overwhelming that I could barely think, but somewhere deep inside me, a voice said that I needed to survive this. I needed to get help. My phone had fallen from my purse during the fall. I could see it lying about 6 feet away, its screen still glowing faintly. I began to drag myself toward it, using only my arms because any movement in my leg sent waves of agony through my entire body. Each inch felt like a mile. Sweat mixed with tears on my face. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood. When I finally reached the phone, I dialed 911 with fingers that would not stop shaking. I told the operator that my husband had pushed me down the stairs and that my leg was broken. I gave her my address and begged her to send help quickly. The wait for the ambulance felt like an eternity. I lay on the cold marble floor, staring up at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. Just 12 hours earlier, I had been getting ready for a gala, thinking the worst thing that could happen was an awkward encounter with my husband's mistress. Now I was lying in a pool of my own tears with a broken leg and a broken marriage. When the paramedics arrived, Derek came back downstairs. He had changed into casual clothes and was acting like a concerned husband who had just heard a terrible accident. He told them I had tripped on the stairs. He said I had been drinking champagne at the gala and must have lost my balance. He actually reached for my hand like he wanted to comfort me. I looked past him at the police officers who had arrived with the ambulance. I spoke as clearly as I could despite the pain. I told them my husband pushed me. I told them he grabbed my hair and threw me down the stairs because I confronted him about his affair. I told them I wanted him arrested. The look on Derek's face when those words left my mouth was priceless. His performance crumbled instantly. He tried to backtrack to claim I was hysterical and confused from the pain, but the officers were already looking at him differently. One of them asked him to step outside while the other stayed with me as the paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and flashing lights, and medical professionals asking me questions I could barely process. All I could think about was the phone call I needed to make, the call that would set everything in motion. The emergency room was bright and loud and full of people in worse shape than me. I was wheeled into a curtained area where a doctor examined my leg and told me what I already knew. It was broken in 2 places. I would need surgery and months of physical therapy. He asked me how it happened, and I told him the truth. He nodded grimly and made notes in my chart. The police came to take my official statement while I waited for the surgical team to become available. I told them everything. The affair, the confrontation at the gala, the argument at home, the moment Derek grabbed my hair and pushed me down the stairs. They photographed my injuries and told me that Derek had been detained for questioning. By 2 a.m, I was out of surgery and lying in a hospital bed with my leg wrapped in a heavy cast and elevated on pillows. The pain medication made everything feel foggy and distant, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I asked the nurse for my phone. When she handed it to me, I scrolled through my contacts until I found my father's number. My thumb hovered over the call button for just a moment. Then I pressed it. He answered on the second ring. His voice was alert despite the late hour, as if he had been waiting for this call without knowing it. He asked me what was wrong, and I could hear the worry in his voice. I told him everything. The affair, the mistress, the apartment Derek had been paying for with our money, the things he had said about only marrying me to get access to our family's wealth, the slap I had given Crystal in front of 500 witnesses, the argument in the car, and finally the moment Derek had grabbed me by the hair and thrown me down the stairs like I was nothing. My father listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried a weight that made my blood run cold and warm at the same time. He asked me one simple question. He asked me what I wanted him to do. I did not hesitate. I said 5 words that I had been thinking ever since I hit the bottom of those stairs. I told him to leave no survivors in that house. My father did not ask for clarification. He did not try to talk me out of it. He simply said it would be done. He told me to rest, to focus on healing, and to let him handle everything from here. He called me his princess, the same way he had when I was a little girl, and promised that the man who had hurt me would lose everything he had ever cared about. After I hung up, I stared at the ceiling of my hospital room and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because I wanted revenge, although I would be lying if I said that was not part of it, but because I knew my father would do what needed to be done. He would protect me the way he always had, and Derek Whitmore was about to learn what it meant to cross the wrong family. I fell asleep that night with the phone still in my hand and a small smile on my lips. The next 48 hours moved faster than I could have imagined. My father did not believe in doing things halfway. When he made a promise, he delivered. Derek was released from police custody after posting bail, but that was the last moment of freedom he would ever truly have. Within 24 hours, he was called into his law firm's managing partner's office and informed that his services were no longer needed. The official reason was a violation of professional ethics, but I knew the real reason. One phone call from my father to the firm's largest client had made Derek's position untenable overnight. That same day, an anonymous package arrived at the Texas State Bar containing documents that detailed Derek's misappropriation of client funds. The investigation that followed would eventually result in the suspension of his law license pending a formal hearing. His career as an attorney was effectively over before the week was out. Crystal did not fare any better. Her company received a call from one of their major partners indicating that they were reconsidering the relationship. When the executives dug deeper, they discovered that the partner in question was a subsidiary of a construction conglomerate owned by Raymond Castellano. Crystal was let go in a restructuring that everyone knew was nothing of the sort. The apartment Derek had been renting for her was terminated when the building management company, which happened to have business relationships with several of my father's associates, informed her that her lease would not be renewed. Derek's bank accounts were frozen as part of the expanding investigation into his financial activities. His credit cards were canceled. His country club membership was revoked. One by one, every pillar of the life he had built came crashing down around him. He tried to contact me several times. He showed up at the hospital, but security had been given his photo with strict instructions to keep him away. He tried calling my phone, but I had blocked his number. He even attempted to reach out through mutual friends, but no one wanted to be associated with him anymore. The man who had been a rising star in Houston's legal community was now a pariah. A week after the assault, Derek was arrested again. This time, the charges were more serious: domestic violence, financial fraud, and misappropriation of funds. He was facing 5 to 10 years in prison if convicted on all counts. His bail was set at $500,000, and with his accounts frozen, he could not pay it. For the first time in his life, Derek Whitmore was sitting in a jail cell with nothing but time to think about what he had done. Crystal abandoned him the moment she realized he was no longer useful. She did not visit him in jail. She did not write letters. She simply moved on to her next target, leaving Derek to face the consequences of his choices alone. I heard through my father that Derek eventually tried to appeal to him directly. He drove to my father's office and demanded a meeting, saying he wanted to work things out, that there had been a misunderstanding, that he still loved me despite everything. My father's associates escorted him off the property with a very clear message. Raymond Castellano had only one thing to say to his former son-in-law: "You should have treated my daughter better. Now you have nothing, and soon you will have even less." 1 month after that night on the stairs, Derek Whitmore stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty to reduced charges as part of a deal his public defender had arranged. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. I did not attend the hearing. I did not need to see him one more time. I had already closed that chapter of my life. Recovery was slow. The physical part was painful but straightforward. 2 surgeries, 3 months of physical therapy, and gradually learning to walk without a limp. My leg would never be exactly the same, but the doctors assured me I would regain full mobility with time and effort. The emotional healing was harder. For the first few weeks, I woke up every night in a cold sweat, dreaming of falling down those stairs. I would reach for my leg in the darkness, half expecting to find it bent at that impossible angle again. The sound of footsteps on stairs made my heart race. The sight of champagne made me nauseous. My father hired the best therapist in Austin to work with me. Her name was Dr. Simmons, and she had spent 30 years helping survivors of domestic violence rebuild their lives. She did not let me minimize what had happened or blame myself for not seeing the signs sooner. She made me understand that Derek's choices were his own, and that nothing I had done justified his violence. Harriet came to see me every week without fail. She brought me flowers, trashy magazines, and the kind of gossip that made me laugh despite everything. She held my hand when I cried and told me that I was the strongest person she had ever known. I did not always believe her, but it helped to hear it. My father was there every day. He moved into my old room at his house so he could be close while I recovered. He hired a private nurse to help me with the things I could not do myself. He sat with me during my physical therapy sessions and celebrated every small milestone like I had won an Olympic medal. I had spent so many years pulling away from him, trying to build my own life with Derek. Now I understood that he had been right all along. Family was everything. The anger took longer to fade than I expected. There were days when I fantasized about Derek's suffering in prison, about Crystal's life falling apart even further, about everyone who had wronged me getting exactly what they deserved. Dr. Simmons said this was normal, that anger was part of the healing process, but she also helped me see that holding on to that rage was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. It was only hurting me. Gradually, I learned to let it go, not because Derek deserved forgiveness. He did not, but because I deserved to be free. I deserved to wake up in the morning without the weight of hatred sitting on my chest. I deserved to build a new life that was not defined by what he had done to me. I started painting again. I had stopped during my marriage because Derek always made me feel like my art was a childish hobby, a waste of time that could be better spent supporting his career. But now, with nowhere to be and no one to impress, I rediscovered the joy I had felt as a young woman, with a brush in my hand and a blank canvas in front of me. My first new painting was an abstract piece in shades of red and gold. I called it Rising. It was not technically perfect, but it was mine. 1 year after that terrible night, I opened my own gallery in downtown Austin. My father helped with the financing, but I did all the work myself. I found the space, negotiated the lease, designed the layout, and curated the first exhibition. The opening night drew a crowd of over 200 people, including artists, collectors, and journalists. I stood in the middle of the room I had created and felt something I had not felt in years: pride. I did not rush into dating again. Dr. Simmons helped me understand that I needed to rebuild my relationship with myself before I could have a healthy relationship with anyone else. I learned to enjoy my own company. I took solo trips to New Mexico and California. I adopted a gray cat named Luna, who slept at the foot of my bed every night. I discovered that being alone was not the same as being lonely. When I thought about Derek now, which was not often, I did not feel rage or sadness. I felt nothing. He was a chapter that had ended a lesson I had learned the hardest possible way. He was sitting in a prison cell somewhere in Texas, and I was living my best life in the gallery I had built with my own 2 hands. That felt like justice enough. The scar on my leg faded over time, but it never disappeared completely. Some mornings I would look at it while getting dressed and remember everything that had happened, not with pain, but with a kind of detached awareness. This was the price I had paid for trusting the wrong person, and this was the reminder that I would never make that mistake again. I learned so many things from what happened to me. I learned that red flags are not decorations. They are warnings, and ignoring them does not make them go away. I learned that the people who seem too perfect are often hiding imperfections they do not want you to see. I learned that love should make you feel safe, not scared. And I learned that walking away from something toxic is not giving up. It is choosing yourself. If you are watching this and you see yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You are not trapped. You are not alone. And you are so much stronger than you think you are. The person who is hurting you wants you to believe you have no options. They want you to feel powerless. But that is a lie they tell to keep you under their control. There is always a way out. There is always someone who will help you if you ask. And there is always a life waiting for you on the other side of the pain. Derek broke my leg, but he could not break my spirit. He took 8 years of my life, but he will not take one more second. I am standing in my own gallery surrounded by art I created, living a life I built for myself. And honestly, that is the greatest revenge of all. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to leave someone who you thought loved you but was actually using you? How did you find the strength to walk away? Please share your thoughts below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and let me know. Your likes help more people find these stories and maybe help someone else who needs to hear that they are not alone. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. I share new videos every week about real people overcoming real challenges. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message today, please share this video with them. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you so much for watching. I am sending you all strength, love, and the courage to always choose yourself first. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.